most people will know by now that there is a crisis and a panic spreading across the country with regards to fuel. But do people actually understand what the problem is and what it is caused by? The word that seems to be spreading is that there is a fuel shortage and therefore you must go out and buy fuel, otherwise you're going to be stuck without fuel and not be able to get anywhere. But this isn't quite the whole of the story. According to Thomson Reuters, BP have said that almost a third of their stations are without fuel, but the Transport Minister insists that there is no shortage of fuel within the country. So what exactly is the problem? Well, this is twofold. First of all, Brexit has caused a disruption in the qualification process and the labour market as a whole for HGV heavy goods vehicle drivers, who obviously are required to deliver the fuel to each individual station. Similarly, the pandemic has had a significant impact on the qualification process, and taken together, this has meant that there is a shortage of drivers to actually get the fuel to the stations. So it isn't that there is a shortage of fuel per se necessarily, more that it is a shortage of drivers to actually get the fuel to each location. In addition to that, if that wasn't bad enough, the spike in energy prices is reportedly forcing some energy companies out of business, which is making it even more difficult to get the fuel where it needs to be. So one of the measures in response to this is to suspend competition law. So what does this actually mean? Well, competition law in the United Kingdom would usually mean that it prevents one company from obtaining a dominant market position or monopoly. And in order to do that, a few things that it restricts is the sharing of information, price setting, collaboration, otherwise known as price fixing, which would otherwise allow one or two major players in the industry to dominate that position and cut others out of the business. The competition law in the United Kingdom is set out in the Competition Act of 1998, and it sets out various prohibitions, things that companies cannot do, broadly set out in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Chapter 1 is primarily concerned with anti-competitive agreements, and I'll explain what this means. So if two companies have a relatively strong position in the marketplace and they have an agreement between each other which is likely to have an effect on UK trade, either for the whole of the UK or for part of it, and that effect is likely to limit, reduce, or affect the competition within the marketplace, then it will be a prohibited agreement or anti-competitive agreement under this chapter. The nature of the agreement might be something that actually restricts competition in the marketplace, or it might be something that just has the potential to restrict competition, but it must be some kind of appreciable risk of potential effect on restriction of the competition. In other words, it needs to be something of real significance. There are some exclusions to this chapter, such as mergers and acquisitions. Clearly, if two companies merge together, then these laws shouldn't normally apply, but there will be a degree of scrutiny by way of other legislation to make sure that this isn't going to have a detrimental effect on competition throughout the UK. The ordinary consequences of breaching these prohibitions, remember these are the laws that are being temporarily suspended to try and solve this fuel problem, are quite significant. First of all, the companies or parties involved would be ordered to cease or modify the agreement. Secondly, as you might imagine, any restrictions that were in that agreement will become unenforceable. Third parties may be able to sue for damages, and possibly most importantly for the companies that are found to be in breach, there may be a fine of up to 10% of the global turnover for those companies. And in addition to that, since 2003 with the Enterprise Act, it became a criminal offence to be involved in a cartel arrangement. But more on that perhaps in another video. Chapter 2 of the Competition Act deals with companies abusing a dominant market position. Quite clearly, if one company alone had the dominant market position and had the ability to push everybody else out of the market and then abused that position, either by way of price hiking and things of that nature, this is something that the law should reasonably seek to restrict. And again, there are similar remedies such as orders to cease or modify, and the fines may be imposed again. So all in all, it's quite a significant decision for these competition laws to be suspended in order to sort out this fuel crisis problem. But remember, it is not necessarily that there is a shortage of fuel, just that there are a number of factors that have come into play to create this problem for there to be a need to fix it in the first place. But in this situation, because so many people have been panic buying fuel and so many areas have been left empty, some people have simply been left without fuel, as reported by Thomson Reuters, such as taxi drivers that have just not been able to get any and therefore lost a full weekend's worth of work because they have no fuel. And the problem isn't limited to fuel either. As we get into the Christmas period, there are going to be thousands upon thousands of drivers required to get all of the stock to the relevant shops that are needed. and therefore this is predictably going to cause shortages if people are panic buying, if people genuinely fear that they won't be able to get what they need. So in response, and in order to help this situation, the business minister has said that he's going to suspend competition laws temporarily to allow companies to work together to solve the problem. And I quote, "This step will allow government to work constructively with fuel producers, suppliers, hauliers and retailers to ensure that disruption is minimized as far as possible." So overall, there is a lesson to be learnt here, that in any situation you should calmly secure all of the facts from a relevant source, not just something that you hear on social media. You should look perhaps to a reputable news company that is reporting directly from sources that will have the information that is relevant and credible, and then make a very reasoned and sound judgment as to whether or not you really need to go out and buy these things. Otherwise, we end up in the panic buy situation, just like we did at the beginning of the pandemic, when we had nurses, doctors and other healthcare staff coming out of their late shifts to buy their weekly groceries overnight, only to find that the shelves were empty because everybody had been panic buying. And these, of course, are the inevitable consequences from acting out of gut reaction and perhaps fear. So I can only urge everybody watching that in any situation like this, please look to a reputable source of information, digest it carefully, and then weigh up what actions you might need to take. I've put a link in the description to the Thomson Reuters article about this situation, which is a news provider that I would trust. And as it happens, I am a contributing author to Thomson Reuters, so I've also put a link to my profile in the description as well. So please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and remember, stay humble and subscribe.